Mommy's bookshelf. It is officially October, so it is time to talk about all the books that I read in September. Of course, keeping up with my tradition of rereading a Cassandra Clare book at the start of every month, the first book I read in September was Clockwork Prince. This book was amazing, no surprise there. It's such a good second book in a trilogy, no middle book syndrome to be found. We have a lot of really iconic scenes between not just Jem and Tessa, but also Will and Tessa. It also includes my favourite song, the Demon Pox song by Will Herondale. Such a bop, deserves a Grammy. Although going into rereading this book, the thing I was most excited about was getting to see more of Magnus. We see him briefly in Clockwork Angel, but we get way more of him in Clockwork Prince. The wisdom, the sass, I love the friendship between Will and Magnus. They have such funny dialogue and scenes together. Also some pretty heartbreaking scenes too. If you've read this trilogy, you know that there are some pretty heartbreaking things that happen at the end of this book, and I can confirm that it hurts just as much the second time around. Something that I also really love about this book is that we get to delve deeper into Will and Jem's relationship. Something that I've always really loved about this trilogy is that Will and Jem's friendship and them being parapetite is just as important as the romantic relationships. I feel like Cassandra Clare does such a great job of writing not just romantic relationships but platonic relationships too. We see that not just with Will and Jem, but Jason, Alec, Simon and Clary, Emma and Christina, the Merry Thieves, even Alec and Clary in later books. And I think it all comes down to just how great Cassandra Clare is at writing an ensemble of characters who have such a great dynamics with each other. I just love every single one of the characters in this book. They're all just amazing and so well written. I love this book. If you haven't read this trilogy yet, you have to read it. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. The next book is a book I had been meaning to pick up for the longest time, and honestly I'm still ashamed it took me this long to finally pick it up, and that book is Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I loved this book. It's definitely become one of my favourite Sarah J. Maas books. I do have to admit the first 150 pages are really difficult to get through. There is a lot of info dumping so that we can learn about this world before we can get into the interesting stuff. But for me, it didn't take away from the enjoyment of the book. As an avid high fantasy reader, I'm pretty used to the info dumps that come with reading a book that's set in a whole new world. And rest assured, if you're reading this book and you're finding all the info to be really confusing, or the important things get re-explained kind of multiple times as you read the book and get past that info dump. So even the things you don't understand at first, you will understand them by the time you get to the point where it's important. Once I got through the info dump, this book just picks up, and I remember every day being so excited to finish everything I needed to do so I could finally sit down and read this book. And once I started reading for the night, I couldn't put it down. I loved the characters in this book. Sarah J. Maas, similarly to Cassandra Clare, is really great at writing an ensemble of characters. The relationship between Bryce and Danica, of course, is the heart and soul of this book. Their connection is so beautiful, and Sarah J. Maas did a really good job of showing us how much they love each other in quite a short span of time. I, of course, need to talk specifically on the romance between Bryce and Hunt. I love them so much. Sarah J. Maas did such a good job of slowly developing their romance over time throughout the length of this book. I know I'm not the only one that is really hoping that Sarah J. Maas does not do a Tamlin to Hunt. If she does, I'm gonna be so upset. If you've read ACOTAR, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read ACOTAR, you're probably very confused, but I hope Bryce and Hunt end up being endgame. But the highlight of this book, the reason why I love it so much, is is the third act. The last 200 pages of this book are mind-blowing. One of the best third acts of a book that I have ever read. I even read the last 200 pages in one sitting because I literally could not put the book down. I was also crying the whole time I was reading the last 200 pages. Sarah J. Maas made me feel all the emotions like she usually does. I am super excited to read book 2, House of Sky and Breath. The cover was just revealed today and I'm even more excited about it now. It comes out early next year in February, I believe, so not too long to wait. I guess a good thing about me taking so long to finally read this book is that I don't have to wait as long for the second book. And of course, Sarah J. Maas set up some things at the end of this book that I'm really excited to see come to fruition in the following books. I have no idea how long this series is actually going to be, but I know I will read every single book and love them all. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is another highly anticipated book by me, and that is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I do have unfortunate news about this book, and that is I got spoiled. This is one of the downsides of joining Bookstagram. I got spoiled for this book. Like, whatever happened to spoiler warnings? For so long, I had absolutely no clue what this book was about. From skimming the synopsis at the back of the book, I kind of gathered there was some kind of love triangle, because I always really like to go into Colleen Hoover's books blind because I just find them more impactful that way. And I feel like with a lot of contemporaries, especially Colleen Hoover books, even the most seemingly minor spoiler, when you actually read it, ends up being a major spoiler. And that's kind of what happened to me. I saw 2 posts about It Ends With Us and I read the caption like a fool, and both those minor spoilers, when I put 2 and 2 together, led to a major spoiler. To really experience this book to the fullest, you really do have to go into it blind. And now that I've read the book, I kind of feel like that's how Colleen Hoover wanted it to be read, because you're supposed to join Lily completely on this journey and experience everything that she's experiencing as she experiences it, and it kind of takes away when you already know what she's going to go through before you've actually read the book. Nevertheless, even though I didn't get to experience this book to its full potential, I still appreciate how well written, how important and how impactful this book is. It's very cleverly constructed to get the most emotionally out of the reader. I didn't actually end up crying in this book, and I don't think it's because I'm a heartless robot, because like I said, I literally cried through the whole last 200 pages of Crescent City. But while reading this book, the things that are very sad and heartbreaking, I was just so shocked and scared for Lily that like I was just frozen with my eyes glued to the page. I was just too shocked and scared to cry. But I do think I would have cried if I hadn't gotten spoiled as well. That definitely also has something to do with it. I'm not gonna say anything more about It Ends With Us because I feel like everything is a spoiler and I don't want you to be spoiled like me. This was such a great book. It definitely would have been at 5 stars if I hadn't been spoiled, but I got spoiled. It is technically my fault, but it did take away from my enjoyment of the book a bit, so I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This is about a girl named Nora who is very unsatisfied with her life. She feels like all her big opportunities have passed her by and that she has nothing really left to live for. So she commits suicide. She finds herself between life and death at the Midnight Library, where she gets the opportunity to live her life if she had made different decisions. I thought the plot of this book overall was really strong. It's such an interesting concept, and I really love seeing all of Nora's alternate lives. It made the book quite episodic, so that made it quite a fast read. I did predict the ending of this book, but I don't think it necessarily took away from my enjoyment, because I feel like it's not really about the ending, it's about the journey that Nora takes to get there and the big message of the story rather than a big plot twist. And something that I saw in a lot of reviews after I finished the book was that a lot of people were complaining that it's pretty much just a self-help book, and that does make sense because I'm pretty sure Matt Haig also writes self-help books, and I do definitely see why people would think that, especially in the third act, the big ending of the book. But to be fair, it didn't bother me too much. I feel like if I'm gonna read a self-help book, I'd rather read it in fiction form, and honestly, it did kind of make me feel better about life. I think this book is worth the read. It's very different from a lot of other books that I've been reading recently, so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The last couple of books I'm going to talk about are the books that I read for the Fall Into Reading reading-a-thon, which I also have a reading vlog for if you want to see my reactions and thoughts on the books as I read them in real time. So the first book that I read as part of the read-a-thon was the group book, which was Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzales. This is about a girl named Darcy who runs an anonymous dating advice service at her school, but a boy at a school discovers her secret identity and he blackmails her into becoming his personal dating coach so that he can win back his ex-girlfriend. I enjoyed this book for the most part. I especially enjoyed the first half of the book. I was really enjoying our main character and her personality and her interactions with the other characters, especially her love interest. There was some really great dialogue and it all felt really fun and light-hearted, everything that I love in a contemporary book. One of the things that I really loved was that our love interest is Australian and Darcy is perpetually perplexed with all the weird slang phrases that he uses. There's one point where he calls her a wuss and I didn't realise that that was only an Australian thing. I thought the term wuss was a universal term. So thank you, Sophie Gonzales, for bringing this to my attention. Whilst I really enjoyed the first half of the book, I became less invested in the plot and the characters in the second half of the book. The book, all in all, just wasn't something super memorable for me. Nevertheless, I did enjoy how everything wrapped up. If you're in the mood for a really fun, light-hearted book, I think you'd really enjoy this. I ended up giving Perfect on Paper a 3 out of 5 stars. I then picked up another contemporary, and that was Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews. This is about a boy named Breg. This is about a boy named Breg. Why do I keep saying Greg. This is about a boy named Greg whose mother forces him to reconnect with a childhood friend after she is diagnosed with leukemia. This book was definitely very different from what I expected it to be. It completely avoids all the stereotypes that come with a book about a girl with cancer. Like, it's not a John Green book where there are these super emotional scenes at the end. There's this really big, important, impactful message. It's very realistic and doesn't sugarcoat what Greg experiences as he watches a friend die. But I think that is what makes the book so powerful. It's about friendship and grief and moving on with life after loss. And I really liked that about this book. This book is very funny. It definitely has some odd, quirky humor. I feel like I've also heard this about Jesse Andrews' other books as well. This is a super quick read. I read it in one day. Greg and Earl are filmmakers and there are whole pages of this book that are just told in screenplay, so they're really quick to get through. There is also a film adaptation which I watched that I thought was just as good as the book. A really great adaptation. The only thing maybe I would say is that I wish I had connected a bit more to the characters. But other than that, it was a really enjoyable read. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The final books I read in September was the Wolf by Wolf duology by Ryan Graudin, which consists of Wolf by Wolf, Blood for Blood, and also a novella that comes in between these two books called Iron to Iron. This duology is amazing. I loved it. This is set in an alternate universe where the Nazis won World War II, and it follows our protagonist Yale, who is a former death camp prisoner, and she enters into the Access Tour, which is an annual motorcycle race to celebrate Hitler's victory in the war. And the winner gets to meet Hitler. So Yale wants to win this motorcycle race so she can meet Hitler and kill him. In the first book specifically, I loved the motorcycle race. It was so thrilling and written so well. I always love a good competition in a book. And we also get to meet super interesting characters, most notably Luca and Felix. There are supernatural elements in this book, and Yale is a skin shifter and she can turn physically into other people. And throughout this book, Yale is disguised as a girl named Adele, who is a victor of a previous Access tour. So not only does Yale have to win this Access race, but she also has to play the part of Adele convincingly and interact with these two other characters who knew the real Adele really well. And it just made for such an exciting book. There was never a dull moment. Before I continued with Blood for Blood, I read the novella that comes in between the two books, Iron to Iron. If you are going to read this duology, which you should, I would highly recommend you read the novella. It follows one of the two characters that I mentioned before, Luca, and it gives so much insight into his character and his motivations and why he is the way that he is. And it just made the whole completion of his character arc in the second book so much more powerful, having known the things I know from reading the novella. Finally, I then finished the duology off by reading Blood for Blood. I didn't enjoy this book as much as I enjoyed Wolf by Wolf. I thought the first and third acts were fantastic, but it kind of lagged a bit in the middle. But other than that, it was such a great read. I love that we got to see the point of views of not just Gale in this book, but also Luca and Felix. And we get to learn a bit more about their past. And I love the resolution of all the character arcs of our three main characters. They were all just so powerful and emotional and just written so well. The whole ending of this book is so powerful. I was crying a lot at the end of this book. I finished this book on Monday night and it is now Friday, and I have not read a single book since because I'm just not ready to move on from the story and these characters. I am very much going through a book mourning period right now. Now, with my ratings of these books, I'm kind of conflicted because looking at these books objectively, I think my ratings are accurate. But when I think about the impact that it had on me and how it's been constantly on my mind ever since I finished reading it, I feel like the ratings should be higher, because usually when I can't get a book out of my mind, that usually means it's going to be one of my favorite books. But at the same time, there are books that I like better. So I don't know, I'm going to share with you what I initially rated them, but take it with a grain of salt because they may change. I gave Wolf by Wolf a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I gave Iron to Iron a 4 out of 5 stars. And I gave Blood for Blood a 4.3 out of 5 stars. Although now that I'm thinking about it, maybe Wolf by Wolf is like a 4.7 and Blood for Blood is like a 4.5. But just know I love these books. I highly recommend them. If you love historical fiction or love books that have a competition in them, read this, you'll love it. So that was all the books I managed to read in September. I read 9 books and I am counting the novella. The readathon definitely allowed me to read more books than I normally would in a month, but I am in no way complaining. Let me know what books you read in September and I'll see you next time. Bye!